Something quiet is happening among the most disciplined thinkers of 2026, and it directly contradicts what modern finance spent decades teaching you. The assumption that intelligent people keep every dollar deployed at all times is not a financial principle. It is a financial illusion. Solomon observed this long before markets existed, and what he recorded in Proverbs was not spiritual advice. It was structural truth about how durable households actually behave across uncertain time. The wise store. The fool consumes all they have. That single line contains an entire architecture of wealth that most people were never shown. If this challenges you, stay until the end. Something is shifting. Not loudly, not dramatically. But if you have been paying close attention to how disciplined and analytical people are quietly rearranging their financial lives in 2026, you have noticed something that does not fit the conventional story. They are holding cash. Not because they are afraid. Not because they have lost confidence, but because something older than modern finance has begun to reassert itself in the minds of those who think carefully about wealth and time. This is not a trend. This is a return. And to understand what is being returned to, you have to first understand what was quietly abandoned, and why that abandonment, dressed in the language of optimization and efficiency, may have cost entire generations something they cannot yet name. Consider two individuals. Same income, same city, same year. The first keeps every dollar working. Every surplus goes into positions. Every idle period feels like a missed opportunity. He has been told by culture, by financial media, by the ambient pressure of modern money conversation, that inactivity is the enemy of wealth. The second individual earns the same amount, invests consistently, but quietly, deliberately, maintains a portion of his resources that he does not touch. Not for emergencies in the conventional sense, not as a psychological security blanket, but as a structured reserve. Capital held with intention. Liquidity preserved as a form of strategic patience. On paper, in the short term, the first individual may appear to be performing better. But watch what happens when conditions shift. Watch what happens when the environment changes without warning. Watch who retains decision-making power. Watch who is forced to act, and who is free to choose. The difference between these two individuals is not intelligence. It is not income. It is not even discipline in the traditional sense. The difference is a principle, one that analytical thinkers in 2026 are quietly rediscovering, not because someone told them to, but because the structure of the world around them is making the old wisdom visible again. Modern finance built a compelling story over several decades. The story goes like this. Idle money is inefficient money. Capital that is not working is capital that is dying. Every dollar sitting still is a dollar being eroded by inflation, opportunity cost, the slow decay of inaction. This narrative created a specific kind of pressure. The salaried worker feels it. Every surplus triggers the question, where should this go? The idea of holding cash, liquid, undeployed, sitting quietly produces a faint discomfort, as though patience itself is a failure of financial sophistication. The investor feels it differently. He fears not the loss of capital as much as the loss of participation, missing the move, being on the sideline during a gain. The anxiety is not about poverty, it is about exclusion from activity. And culture reinforced it from every direction. The person who kept money liquid was portrayed as passive, unsophisticated, waiting for courage he would never quite find. Constant deployment became the signal of financial seriousness. Inactivity became something to apologize for. This was the dominant narrative, and it was not without logic. Markets have historically rewarded long-term participation. Compound does favor consistent, patient investment. These are not lies, but something important was quietly removed from the framework. A structural element that ancient households never considered optional. Before modern markets existed, before indices and portfolios and diversification strategies, households managed wealth through a fundamentally different structure. The ancient Hebrew household, for example, did not measure financial health by the size of its positions. It measured health by the integrity of its reserves. This was not philosophy. It was survival engineering. Agricultural economies operated in cycles. Harvest abundance was followed reliably by periods of scarcity. Trade routes were disrupted by weather, conflict, disease. A merchant who had extended every resource in a period of prosperity found himself without options when conditions changed. The household that maintained reserves was not being conservative. It was being structurally intelligent. And this wisdom was recorded not as financial advice in the modern sense, but as observed truth about how durable households operated across uncertain time. Proverbs 21:20 states it with characteristic directness. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools consume all they have. Read that carefully. Not with spiritual ears only, with structural ones. The wise store up. The fool consumes all they have. This is not a moral judgment about generosity or frugality. It is an architectural observation. The household that deliberately preserves a portion of its resources possesses something the consuming household never will. Options. Ancient households understood this clearly. The reserve was not excess. It was not laziness. It was infrastructure. As essential to the household's long-term function as the roof above it or the walls around it, the reserve was the structure beneath the structure. Here's the assumption that modern finance quietly built into its language. All capital should remain deployed. It sounds rational. It references real principles, compounding opportunity cost, market participation. And in specific contexts, for specific goals, those principles are accurate. But the assumption contains a hidden cost that rarely gets examined. When all capital is deployed, timing control is surrendered. Think about what that means, practically. The person who must remain fully invested, who has no reserve, no protected liquidity, does not get to choose the moment of his financial decisions. The moment chooses him. When an expense emerges, he responds. When a position must be liquidated to cover a need, he liquidates regardless of conditions, regardless of timing, regardless of whether that moment is favorable. He is, structurally, reactive. And reactive financial behavior, regardless of how sophisticated the positions it reacts from, operates at a permanent disadvantage. Consider the contrast plainly. Investor A holds every dollar in positions. A period of market stress arrives. He needs capital for a significant expense, a professional decision, a family need, an unexpected cost. He sells, not because the conditions are right, because he has no other option. He is forced into the market at the worst possible moment, not by his judgment, but by his structure. Investor B has maintained a reserve. The same period of market stress arrives. The same expense emerges. He draws from his reserve quietly. His positions remain untouched. He waits. The conditions are not right to act, so he does not act. Liquidity is not inefficiency. Liquidity is decision freedom. Ancient households understood this clearly. They did not maintain reserves because they lacked ambition. They maintained them because they understood that the ability to wait is one of the most powerful financial instruments a household can possess. The principle behind this behavior has a name. It is called the law of reserve capital. Not a modern invention. Not a strategy developed by a financial institution or popularized by an investment culture. It is a structural observation consistent across ancient trade systems, agricultural economies, and merchant families who built durable wealth across generations. The law of reserve capital states this. A disciplined household always preserves a protected reserve of liquid capital that remains untouched during normal financial activity, ensuring stability and strategic opportunity across uncertain economic cycles. Notice what this principle does not say. It does not say, save everything. It does not say, avoid investment. It does not say, hold cash because markets are dangerous. It says, always preserve a protected reserve. Always. Not sometimes. Not during crises. Not reactively. Always. The disciplined household divides its financial resources into two distinct roles. The first is active capital. This is the portion engaged in daily financial activity, spending, investing, building positions, managing obligations. This capital moves. It participates. It seeks return. The second is reserve capital. This is the protected portion. It does not participate in normal financial activity. It is not deployed It is not touched because an opportunity appears attractive. It is held. Deliberately, quietly, with full awareness of its purpose. These two roles are not in competition. They are in partnership. The active capital works. The reserved capital watches. And the household that maintains this structure operates with a kind of stability that the fully deployed household simply cannot access. Here is where the structure begins to reveal something unexpected. Disciplined families, those who have operated according to this principle across generations, often refuse to invest available capital, even when conditions appear favorable, even when markets are rising, even when the cultural pressure to participate is at its loudest. To an outside observer, this appears irrational, almost stubborn. Why hold capital when it could be working? But the disciplined household is not operating on the same timeline as the outside observer. It is not managing quarterly performance. It is managing structural integrity across decades. The refusal to deploy reserve capital is not fear. It is not ignorance. It is the behavior of a household that understands something the constantly active participant has not yet grasped. The value of reserves is not measured by what they earn while sitting still. It is measured by what they enable when conditions demand a decision. A household with reserves is never desperate. It is never forced. It never sells because it has to. It never participates because anxiety pushed it forward. It acts only when it chooses to act. And that the freedom to choose is not a minor financial advantage. It is a structural one that compounds quietly, invisibly, across every decision a household makes for years and decades. This is the identity shift that the law of reserve capital produces. Not a new investment strategy. Not a different allocation model. A fundamentally different relationship with money itself. The person who begins to apply this principle does not simply change their financial behavior. They change what they value inside financial behavior. Before this shift, the goal is performance, return, participation, being in the right position at the right time. After this shift, the goal is something quieter, but more durable. Control, the ability to observe without obligation, to wait without anxiety, to act from strength rather than from necessity. Two households sit in the same economic environment, the same news cycle, the same market conditions, the same external pressures that arrive without warning in any given year. One household watches the environment with a faint, persistent tension, because every shift in conditions is a potential disruption to its structure. Every unexpected cost is a decision that must be made, and the timing of that decision is not its own. The other household watches quietly, with something that resembles calm, not because it has predicted the environment correctly, not because it is immune to difficulty, but because it knows its position. It has reserves. Its decisions belong to it. That calm is not accidental. It is structural. And once a person begins to feel the difference between these two orientations, not theoretically, but in the daily texture of their financial life, they do not easily return to the old model. But this leads to something deeper, something that the surface understanding of the law of reserve capital does not immediately reveal, because the stability that reserves provide is only the first layer of what this structure produces. Beneath the stability is something more powerful, and to understand it, you have to look not at what reserves protect, but at what they create. Ancient merchants knew this. Disciplined families across centuries of economic unpredictability knew this. And the analytical thinkers who are quietly holding cash again in 2026 are beginning to understand it, sometimes without being able to fully name what they are sensing. Reserves do not merely protect. They position, and what they position a household to do, quietly, patiently, without announcement, is where the deeper mechanism of this ancient structure begins to reveal itself. That revelation is where we are headed. But to receive it correctly, the structure must first be fully understood for what it is, not as a saving strategy, not as a risk management tool, but as an architecture of patience, a way of standing in financial time that most people have never been given the language to describe. Ancient households understood this clearly, and what they understood is worth examining very carefully. Reserves do not merely protect, they position. Hold that distinction carefully, because it contains a difference between two entirely different ways of moving through economic time. The household that builds reserves only for protection is thinking defensively. It is preparing for disruption. And that preparation has genuine value. We established that clearly. Stability across uncertain seasons is not a minor advantage. It is the foundation beneath every other financial decision the household will make. But the household that understands reserves as positioning that is operating from a different level of the same principle. It is not waiting to survive difficulty. It is waiting for the moment that difficulty creates. History offers this pattern with striking consistency. Merchants in ancient trade economies who maintained reserves did not simply survive disruptions to the trade routes. They profited from them. When supply chains were interrupted, when goods became scarce, when other merchants were forced to sell quickly to recover liquidity, the merchant with reserves moved differently. He did not panic. He did not contract. He observed, he waited, and when the moment arrived, when prices reflected the desperation of others, rather than the true value of the goods, he acted not from anxiety, from preparation. This is principle 2 within the law of reserved capital. Liquidity creates opportunity during instability. The ancient merchant understood that cycles of disruption were not anomalies to be feared. They were regularities to be prepared for. Every period of economic stress that punished the overextended household created a corresponding window for the household with reserves. The same pattern moves through every era of economic history. The structure of the opportunity changes. The names change. The instruments change. but the underlying dynamic remains constant. Those who hold liquidity during instability are never forced to sell. They are positioned to buy. And the prices available to the patient buyer during a period of stress are rarely available at any other time. This is not speculation. It is structural observation. Cycles reward those who wait. And waiting, at the level this principle describes, requires more than intention. It requires a household structure that makes patience possible, not as a temperamental virtue, but as a built-in feature of how capital is organized. Now the full architecture of the law of reserve capital becomes visible. Layer 1. Reserves create stability. The household maintains function across economic seasons without being forced into reactive decisions. Layer 2. Reserves create opportunity. The household possesses the capacity to act when conditions favor the patient, when the unprepared are contracting and the disciplined are quietly advancing. But there is a third element, a lever hidden inside the first two, and this is where the mechanism reveals its full depth. When a household combines stability with opportunity positioning, it gains something that cannot be purchased, cannot be replicated through income alone, and cannot be built quickly. It gains timing, control. Not the ability to predict markets. Not forecasting. Not the illusion of knowing what will happen next. Something more reliable than prediction. The ability to wait until the moment is right, and to act only then. The forced seller has no timing control. He sells when he must. The terms are set by his circumstances, not his judgment. Every financial decision he makes carries the shadow of necessity behind it. The patient buyer with reserves chooses his moment. He may wait longer than feels comfortable. He may observe opportunities that appear attractive and decline them, because his reserves give him the freedom to wait for something better. His decisions are expressions of judgment, not responses to pressure. This is the hidden lever. Reserves convert economic chaos into strategic advantage. Not for everyone. Only for those who have built the structure in advance. Only for those who have held the reserve when holding it felt unnecessary, when markets were rising, when inactivity felt like a cost, when the cultural pressure to deploy was loudest. The preparation that feels wasteful during calm periods is exactly what creates the advantage during disrupted ones. Ancient households understood this clearly. But here is where the honest examination of this principle must address something most discussions quietly avoid. Maintaining reserves is psychologically difficult. Not in theory, in practice, in the daily texture of watching capital sit still while other people appear to be moving. The temptations are real and they arrive in predictable forms. The first is the return chase. Markets move upward. Positions perform. The person who is fully deployed is generating visible results. The reserve holder watches this and feels the quiet pressure of comparison. His reserves are not performing in that visible sense. And comparison, even unconscious comparison, produces pressure to participate. The second temptation arrives through financial news. Every week produces a narrative, an opportunity that must be acted on now, a development that changes the calculus, a window that will not remain open. These narratives are not always false, but they are almost always urgent. And urgency is the enemy of the reserve holder's most important asset, patience. The third temptation is social. Investment, culture rewards, visible activity. The person who discusses positions, who participates in the conversation of markets, who can speak to recent moves, that person reads as financially serious. The person who holds reserves and waits reads, to an outside observer, as someone who has not yet figured out what to do. The disciplined household resists all three of these quietly, not dramatically, not with declarations of philosophical principle. Simply by returning, again and again, to the structure. The reserve exists. It is protected. It is not casual capital. Its purpose is not quarterly performance. Its purpose is structural integrity across time. That clarity, maintained consistently, is what separates households that talk about patience from households that actually practice it. Timing belongs to those who hold reserves. This brings the entire framework into a longer view. And that longer view requires a shift in how wealth is measured. All modern financial culture measures performance in compressed timelines, annual returns, quarterly results, monthly comparisons. The entire language of financial evaluation is structured around short intervals. And in short intervals, the reserve holder will often appear to underperform. His deployed capital may match or exceed the market. But his reserves, the protected portion, are not producing visible return in the conventional sense. On a short timeline, this looks like inefficiencies. On a generational timeline, it looks entirely different. The household that maintains structural integrity across decades, that never collapses under pressure, never liquidates at the wrong moment, never makes desperate decisions, accumulates something that cannot appear in a quarterly report. Compounded option. Every decision that was made from strength rather than necessity. Every position that was held because the household had the reserves to wait. Every opportunity that was taken because the liquidity was available when others had none. These do not show up as line items. They accumulate as outcomes. And across decades, the structural difference between the household that always had reserves and the household that never did becomes visible in ways that cannot be explained by any single decision. Wealth moves quietly through generations precisely because its architecture is invisible to those who measure only in short intervals. There is a behavior common to households that have practiced the law of reserve capital across time. They do not discuss their reserves publicly. This is not secrecy for its own sake. It is structural. The discipline of reserves requires removing the capital from social consideration. Money that is spoken about becomes money that is evaluated by others. Money that is evaluated by others becomes money that generates pressure to deploy it, to justify its stillness, to explain its purpose to people who measure by short time lease. The silent household avoids this, not by hiding, but by simply removing the conversation. Wealth operates quietly. It does not announce its reserves. It does not explain its patience. It simply maintains its structure season after season, cycle after cycle, and allows time to do what time does for those who have prepared for it. This silence is not arrogance. It is discipline. And it connects to something deeper about how the ancient wisdom framed financial character. The fool, Proverbs tells us, consumes all they have. But notice, the fool's consumption is not only material, it is structural. He deploys everything. He retains nothing. Every resource is expressed, visible, spent. The wise household stores, quietly, without announcement, without seeking validation for its patience. The structure is maintained not for appearance, but for function. Modern culture has constructed an entire identity around financial activity. The person who is always moving, always building, always in the next thing. Movement as virtue, hustle as character. Perpetual engagement as the signal of serious ambition. Ancient wealth was never built this way. Not because ancient people lacked ambition, but because ancient people who built durable wealth understood something that constant activity obscures. Movement and control are not the same thing. The merchant who is always transacting is not necessarily the merchant who is advancing. He may simply be the merchant who cannot be still, who cannot wait, who confuses participation with progress. The disciplined household does not romanticize stillness. It is not passive. It simply understands that action taken from reserves, chosen action, timed action, action that emerges from patience rather than anxiety, produces fundamentally different results than action taken from pressure. Liquidity is quiet strength. And quiet strength, maintained consistently across cycles, produces outcomes that visible activity rarely matches. Here is how this principle enters daily life in a practical form. Each evening, not as a ritual of anxiety, but as a brief, composed review, the disciplined household asks a single question. If a genuine opportunity appeared tomorrow, would this household be ready? Not, have I maximized every position today? Not, am I performing against my benchmark? Not, what did the market do, and how did I respond? Simply, if the moment arrived, the moment that rewards the prepared, would I be in position to act? This question reorients the entire frame of financial evaluation. It moves the measure from activity to readiness, from performance to structure, from what happened today to what this household is positioned to do when conditions warrant. The household that can answer yes consistently across months and years, regardless of what markets are doing, has built something that extends beyond any single financial decision. It has built a financial identity, and that identity, reinforced daily through this quiet practice, gradually replaces the anxious participation that modern finance installed as the default. Sit with the verse once more. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools consume all they have. When Solomon recorded this observation, he was not issuing a moral warning about greed or excess. He was describing two structural orientations toward resources and their consequences across time. The fool is not necessarily foolish in intelligence. He may be sharp, ambitious, well-informed that he consumes all he has. Every resource is expressed. Every surplus is deployed. Every reserve is either absent or treated as temporary, something to be resolved into activity as soon as confidence returns. The wise store up, not everything, but something. A protected portion, a deliberate reserve. capital that does not move because its stillness is its function. The ancient wisdom did not promise that reserves would make life comfortable. It observed that reserves make choices possible. And over time, across cycles, across seasons, across the kinds of shifts that no one predicts correctly, the household with choices consistently outperforms the household that has surrendered its options to constant activity. This is what disciplined thinkers in 2026 are quietly rediscovering. Not a new idea, not a modern insight, but an ancient structure that has always been present beneath durable wealth, simply waiting to be seen clearly by those who are ready to look. The wise household does not rush toward profit. It prepares quietly for the moment when profit has no choice but to come to it. And when that moment arrives, when others are reactive, when others are forced, when others are making decisions they did not choose, the prepared household simply acts. Calmly, deliberately, from strength. That is the law of reserve capital. That is what the wise have always stored. And now, you understand why. The law of reserve capital, ancient wealth psychology, Proverbs 21:20. Subscribe for weekly wisdom on disciplined wealth thinking.